Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Beatrice Hyppolite and this is your world. Hello everyone. Today, we have the privilege to have back on the show Dr. Florenal Joseph. Dr. Joseph, thank you for coming. And how are you?
I'm good, Dr. Hyppolite. Thank you for having me again. Thank you for the invitation. And as I said, I'm a resources to this show. So
okay, I like that. I like that. I like that.
Anyhow,
Dr.
I
Joseph.
can be useful to you and to your audience. I would try to make myself available, and this is exactly what happened today. It seems like I can be useful to your show today, and I'm here again.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting me for the second time.
Okay, I really like that. Last time you were with us, Dr. Joseph, we spoke about Alzheimer's disease. And today, so we're going to talk about...
Parkinson disease.
Okay.
It's like we're covering the neurodegenerative diseases, actually. We spoke about Alzheimer. Today we'll be talking about Parkinson. So that's really good. That's great.
Okay, like my audience, I'm illiterate in that area. So walk us through it.
Look, you said illiterate. I don't think you are. You do know a lot about it, but we're trying to bring it down to the ground for your audience, for those who are listening to us, all the listeners. We will be talking about it. So like we said in the previous show, when we were talking about Alzheimer's disease, today Parkinson's disease is one of those kind of neurodegenerative diseases. That means it's a disease that is mainly characterized by those cells, what we call the nerve cells, the neuronal cells, those cells in your brain, they degenerate. And when those cells start to degenerate, unfortunately, when they get damaged, they die. There's no repair mechanisms for them. Unfortunately, those cells, when they degenerate again, they can lead to some symptoms, including some movement symptoms you may have.
But does the brain have the capacity or the ability to regenerate on itself?
Unfortunately, the nerve cells is not the same as the other cells we have, whether the somatic cells, the cells we have on our skin, the cells we have on our heart, or the sex cells, those cells that we have in our gonads that have the ability to reproduce either via mitosis or meiosis. The cells in our brain, it's not the same for them, unfortunately. When they don't have the possibility to regenerate themselves like those cells I just talked about. And the worst thing as well, when the cells get damaged, there's a process by which the cell can repair itself. There's a repair mechanisms that can happen to the cells, but the cells that we have in our brain, unfortunately, when they get damaged, they die. They can't repair themselves. And actually, that's a very good line of research. Actually, I remember when I was a PhD student, my lab is still actually working on finding a mechanism for those cells to repair themselves. We are in the process of finding something that can be very helpful for those people who are suffering with those kind of neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's disease. But the cells, they don't repair themselves, as a short answer, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. So, but what are the current theories on the cause of Parkinson's disease and how do genetic and environmental factors contribute to the development of the disease?
So you get it right. You just said it here. Unfortunately, the causes for Parkinson's disease is quite unknown. We do not know the exact cause for Parkinson's disease. But what we do know, there are some factors, as you mentioned here. Genetic factors, that's one, we think. And the second one, it's environmental factors. Those are the two factors that we think contribute to Parkinson's disease. Genetics, because you can have those genes. We have several genes that are linked to Parkinson's disease. And those genes, they can be mutated. We can see how that mutations can trigger to change in your brain, in those cells, and that can trigger those symptoms that we may be talking about later on. And those genes include, for instance, the famous Parkinson 9, Park9 genes. We have several other types, Park9, Park2, SNCA, which is an alpha-synuclein gene. And the alpha-synuclein genes is very interesting in the sense that it's a small protein, very small. I'm so sorry for your audience if I'm getting a little more molecular.
We need that because we want to fully understand
yeah.
exactly what's going on
So
with that disease.
that is great. So we have to fully understand that. So what happens here, there's a small protein that we call alpha-synuclein. It's very small because it's about 14 kilodaltons, so very, very small protein. That we found that this protein, it has to do with some other granules that accumulate in our brain, which we call Lewy bodies. Those Lewy bodies, they accumulate in a specific region of your brain, which we call substantia nigra. When those Lewy bodies accumulate there, so they prevent those neuronal cells to secrete a very important neurotransmitters that we call dopamine. It prevents those cells to secrete. We call them dopaminergic cells, neuronal cells. They cannot secrete dopamine. So dopamine literally, it's a small protein. It's a small molecules, I would say, that literally put your brain in contact with the rest of your body.
That's the importance of the dopamine.
Dopamine is extremely important because it's a signaling molecules. You know, all the signals, they come from your brain. Mm-hmm. When those nerve cells, they fires, when they fires, like this fire you have behind us here, so they are sending a message. But for that message to be distributed throughout your body,
the dopamine,
you need the dopamine as
is
signaling molecules. For that. It's a neurotransmitter. It transmits this message. So when you have those neuronal cells, those nerve cells, they cannot secrete dopamine. So now you have those molecule that I called earlier Lewy bodies that accumulate in that substantia nigra, and that cause you will start having some problem within your whole body that is linked to this problem that we have in our brain.
When you say, Dr. Joseph, some problems, so can you mention at least one or two?
Of course, that brings us to actually the symptoms that we can have. They can link to some movement problem. Those are the motor symptoms, movement, including, for instance, slowness in your movement. For instance, someone who suffers from Parkinson's disease, you may be sitting down, but when you're standing up, you can't. You are slow to stand up. The jargon to that is bradykinesia. Somebody who suffers bradykinesia, that means they are slow in the movement. Not only that, they have tremor, like you may want to take something and it's involuntary when you have tremor. You want to grab something and you start to shake. Yeah, your hands start shaking involuntarily. And it's asymmetrical, those movements. The tremor movement is asymmetrical. What does I mean by that? You start feeling it only in one side of your body. This A means without. It's not the perfect symmetrical where you feel it in both ends. However, as you're progressing in this disease, you will start feeling in both hands. The same way you're taking something, you start shaking here, you can feel it as well with this hand also. You can feel it with this hand. So it's asymmetrical at first, at the beginning, where you start feeling that shaking, that tremor, and you have the slow movement as well. And as you're progressing, there's symptoms that we call dystonia. Dystonia, it's like you start to pour saliva, right? It's this involuntary movement, like you may be sitting and without knowing it, you're not doing anything and saliva start to be pouring out of your mouth. That can have some social impact on you, right?
Because that can prevent you from going outside or
Exactly.
socializing with others.
Exactly.
Because you don't want for people to notice that you are dealing with this problem.
That is so true what you say. And again, you will see how that will link
to depression and anxiety.
What you have in that show, the mental health side of your show in general, it's mainly focused on mental health, and you can see how Parkinson's disease can lead to that, because what I just said, and you just said it too, when you start having the social problem, that can lead to what we call the non-motor symptoms. The non-motor symptoms, those are symptoms that they are not really related to movement, but the consequences can clearly linked to mental health, like depression, as you said, anxiety.
And people will start to isolate themselves more.
Exactly. That can even lead to suicide. Yeah.
Oh, that is very serious.
Problem.
Oh, wow.
Those are the kind of diseases you don't hear a lot of people talking much about them, because in United States, for instance, we have approximately less than 1 million people diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
What is the age of onset?
Look, we can classify them as we did for Alzheimer's disease. We can classify Parkinson's disease into different stages: the early stage, the mid stage, and the late stage. The early stage, it can start as early as 12 years old, 15 years old. That's what we call Parkinsonism. That's early onset of Parkinson's. So you can see it in a child. Specifically, when you notice that in children, like 12 years old, like those adolescents, it's mainly linked to genetic problems. As we said, the cause can be genetics and or environmental. So genetically, you can have this kind of defect in those genes responsible for Parkinson's disease, and that kids, unfortunately, can inherit that defective genes, and now they can have these Parkinsonisms, those that early onset of it. As you progress, we say Parkinson's disease is like an aging disease. That means as you're getting older, the tendency is that you may be prone to Parkinson's disease. So someone between 40, 50 years old, up to 60 can also have Parkinson's disease, right? Because it's an aging disease. However, as you're getting above 60 years old, I would classify at the late onset of Parkinson's disease, late stage of Parkinson's disease above 60 years old. Now there's a higher chance for you to get this kind of disease.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting. It's very important to know. I remember last time, you were here, we spoke about Alzheimer, and you mentioned that Alzheimer is more prone to be diagnosed in female compared to male. What about Parkinson's disease?
Actually, that's a good point you just raised. The gender prevalence of this disease, you find it's more in men than it is in female. It's about 1.5 times higher in men than it is in women. That's very important to consider. However, in women older than 85 years old, we notice that there's a higher prevalence in this group. Those who are older than 85 years old, the women, you have more of them diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Why? Because it's life expectancy and aging. Why? Because women tend to live longer than men.
Yes, according to research.
As women tend to live longer than men, that means you will find more aging women than you find men. And as they are being aged, and we said Parkinson's disease is mainly, it's an aging disease, so you can find this prevalence to be higher in women because they live longer, so they are older, so you find this high prevalence in women than it is in men. Only in this range, 85 and above among women.
I'm gonna keep on going back to our last show. I remembered you mentioned that according to research, one of the reasons that the disease Alzheimer is more prevalent in women compared to men, it's due to stress, anxiety, and depression. So now you said Parkinson, men tend to get affected more compared to women. So is there a reason why?
That's a good point. That's a very good question, actually. We just spoke about a few symptoms, whether it's motor symptoms related to movement or non-motor symptoms, non-movement symptoms. When we talk about motor symptoms, we spoke about bradykinesia, slowness of movement. We spoke about dystonia, like spasm. We spoke about tremor. Imagine as a man, you start having those kind of problems. Men in general, they want to expose themselves. That's the way women do. But a man that can't who want to talk to a female, and you start shaking in front of the female. You imagine what that can cause to you. You will start to just close on yourself, right? You close on yourself, and that can trigger this kind of, you're anxious because you don't know how would you react when you see that female, right? You're slow to stand up. You start shaking. That's the tremor
And
side
you
of
don't
it.
want to be seen that way.
You don't want to be seen that way. So that can create this kind of anxiety, this kind of depression. So when that is created in those men, not only they are prone to have this disease, but they can have those kind of symptoms that we saw in Alzheimer in female, then we saw them in men. But with Parkinson, the symptoms, you will see them in men, then you see them in female, because they are prone to feel anxious, to feel depressed. They are apathy, so they don't want to do anything. They don't want to go out at this time because they don't know how the body will react. So it's a very, very interesting, when I say interesting, quote unquote, it's a difficult problem for those men to deal with. So that's why.
So
you can see
it's
that.
like they will see it as an handicap
It
to
is.
isolate themselves and not to be in public or socialize with, because hey, like you mentioned, men always want to be seen as being.
Men always want to be men. Wherever they go, men want to be men. You want to portray yourself as a man. Unfortunately, you have this kind of problems that prevent you from expressing yourself. Therefore, you will reply on yourself. You just close up. You just get back to yourself. You cannot go forth, so that prevents you from doing this. And of course, that can lead to those mental health issues related like to depression, apathy, anxiety, to all of those problems.
So based on my personal opinion, the challenge in Parkinson's disease compared to Alzheimer's disease, women who will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease will be, 65 and up, like you mentioned, last time. So there are women in their 40s due to stress, depression, and anxiety that can be diagnosed, at a very early age, like 40 and up.
Indeed.
But for Parkinson, for the fact that you can be diagnosed with the disease at the age of 12, at any given time, so it can be 12, you can be 20, so you don't know. So that's what makes it most challenging for men compared to women.
Exactly. That's why the early onset of Parkinson's disease, which we call Parkinsonisms, in the early age, like those adolescents that can be diagnosed with that. Imagine a young boy who's diagnosed with this disease. That can affect his whole life.
Yes, indeed.
Early age, and get diagnosed with that. But one thing we have to say with diagnosis, I'm not a medical doctor, but we know when you're being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, only one symptom is not enough to diagnose you as somebody who has Parkinson's disease. You may have this kind of tremor, but that's not enough to say, okay, you have Parkinson's disease. They have to see several different symptoms before they can say, okay, you have this disease.
Definitely. So I'm not a medical doctor myself, but I'm pretty sure even, like to diagnose somebody with a mental health problem. So they are, you're looking for many things. The time, the duration. So it's like, it's a lot of things to be considered before you even say, because when you diagnose someone, diagnosing somebody is very serious.
Of course.
That's why nobody can take the liberty to just
say anything about somebody's health.
So stay on your lane.
Yeah, that's right. We have to stay, which we lack in this right now at this time. There are many people, they think they can do anything. They do not know where their strengths are. So they think they are good at everything. They can do everything. Unfortunately, because you need to stay in your lane, as you said, do what you can do, speak about what you can speak about.
Yeah, exactly. So am I a biologist? No. But for the fact that I can conduct some research with and inform or educate myself about Parkinson's disease, I cannot go and present myself as a biologist to present a whole presentation. I may read about it.
All right. I understand that.
If you give me a PowerPoint presentation and you send me, you say, go and read that and present that. Even if I were to go and present that, I should give you credit to say, Dr. Joseph's supposed to come and present that to you, but since he's not capable of doing it, so he asked me to come and read this to you, and next time you will do the presentation. I have to know how to stay on my lane.
Right, that's right. I remember that during the COVID time, I heard people telling others to drink bleach to cure COVID-19. So I heard those outrageous claims anyway.
You wanna get me into politics?
I don't know if it's a politician who said that anyway, but I heard those kind of claims.
No,
and
but that was
seriously, it
that
was
was
really outrageous.
oh yeah, if I
Outrageous.
may put it that way. So it was really out of the line.
Yeah.
So
If we get back to Parkinson, there's one thing I want to say. We spoke about the genetic factors. We know today we have almost 12 million people in the world who are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So that's a big thing. And that number tends to literally double by 2050. So today we're talking about almost 12 million. So by 2050, they project that it can be about 25 millions. And even in the United States, as I said earlier, back from like the last paper I read actually about this, it was published in the Frontier journals, so they're very high-ranked journals. It went back to 2021 that says that we have about 900,000 people in the United States diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And by 2030, that number tends to go up to 1.2 million. So it's increasing. And talking about the United States, there is a very big geographical component in it. So where you live in the United States have an effect of the prevalence of getting Parkinson's disease.
So you're talking about the environmental factors.
That's the environmental factors. That is right. Because let's say, for example, if you take the Midwest of the United States, like Kansas, Michigan, you take those states there, the prevalence of having Parkinson's disease is higher than it is in other places, in other states. Why? Because of the environmental factor. As we said, we got those industry there, those chemicals that are being released there, they can impact your health. If you take what we call the Parkinson belt, that include Utah, Colorado, those states as well, they have a high prevalence of Parkinson's disease there because of, again, the environment, those chemicals that are being released there. So not only where you live, but also what you eat can influence you to make you prone to Parkinson's disease. Because when you're getting a diet, one symptoms we didn't really speak about, it's constipation. Constipation can be a non-motor symptom linked to Parkinson's disease.
Oh, really?
Yes, it can.
Also,
Because in the science actually, they define constipation as having fewer than 3 bowel movements in a week.
Mm-hmm.
If you have fewer than 3, they understand that you are like constipated. But constipation, that can lead to stress. You may be very stressed and you can't really you cannot have this bowel movement just by having the stress. But if you have a diet that is not balanced, you don't have enough fibers in your diet, that can lead to constipation as well. So that's why what you eat, you get the environmental factors, your diet as well. It's very important that you control your diet, because by not controlling it, that can have an effect on your health, and that has an effect on your mental as well.